students get that. Proper appreciation of our culture, proper appreciation of history, proper appreciation of the sciences. That's when the critical mind starts working. And finally, as my batchmate Aleli Domingo points out, the UP student can finally interpret what the oblation means beyond doing what he wants. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat sa UP para sa imbitasyon na maging bahagi ng napakahalagang talakayan na ito. Thank you very much, Dr. Tadem, for your paper. I think this paper will be a useful contribution to the growing number of literature that aims to look at the country's negotiating policy in multilateral negotiations, such as in the WTO. I'd like to highlight and comment on 5 points from the paper. The first point is with respect to the role of the legislature. I agree with Dr. Tadem that in the Philippines, international trade negotiations are left entirely to the executive department. And the paper cites some of the advantages in this setup. As you said, Congress can be very parochial. It is subject to intense lobbying by a few interest groups. It still has to develop the expertise and acquire the language of the negotiations to allow it to participate in the international trade negotiations more effectively. All these are true, and I agree with you that it will be very difficult and very unwieldy if we are to involve Congress in the day-to-day or in the minute details of the negotiations. Having said that, however, I think there is still great value in the idea of Congress participating and taking an important role in the trade policy process. And I'm referring to the process of setting the general trade policy framework or the general orientation and direction of our trade policies. No? For instance, Congress can respond to questions such as, what should be the purpose of our trade policy? Should it be to support domestic industries, or should it be to ensure that the Philippines has a good standing in multilateral organizations such as in the WTO? Tinatanong nga ni Yusek Serrano kanina, ano ba yung long-term, ano ba yung strategic role ng trade policy natin? So, it's important for Congress to be able to respond to these questions. At the same time, Congress can provide the necessary check and balance to the executive department. I think if we leave the negotiations entirely to the executive department, and here I'm not only referring to the Department of Agriculture, but also to other agencies such as the Department of Trade and Industry and NEDA, there is a great danger of policy capture, especially by neoliberal thinkers who believe that free trade is the end-all and be-all of trade policy negotiation. And we know that a lot of agencies depend on foreign-funded consultants for technical support, and more often than not, these consultancy groups are very theoretical as well as very neoliberal in thinking. I think Congress can help provide an oversight function on trade policies to ensure that they support national development objectives. So, this is also the reason why a lot of civil society organizations are proposing what Yusek Serrano mentioned earlier, the creation of the Philippine Trade Representative Office, which will get general mandate from Congress on the general direction as well as objective of trade policies, without being involved, of course, in the details as well as the day-to-day activities related to the negotiations. So, the second point relates to the flexibility of the trade negotiator. I think we were very lucky in the agricultural sector because the key negotiator is Yusek Serrano, and he is very open to inputs from small agricultural producers and stakeholders groups. But there are also great dangers in cases where, as the paper puts it, we have one person single-handedly negotiating an agreement that will impact the entire country. If the person who is doing the negotiations is not open to inputs from civil society as well as stakeholders groups, then you have a very big problem, not only in terms of transparency and accountability, but also in the soundness as well as appropriateness of the resulting trade policy. For instance, I know a lot of groups, labor groups such as the Alliance of Progressive Labor, as well as other industry associations, who are very concerned that there is very little consultation and information on services and trade negotiations. So while there are consultations in agriculture, there are very limited consultations when it comes to the NAMA or non-agri market access as well as the services negotiation. There is a sense that their negotiating agenda are so far from the realities as well as sensitivities of the services and industry sector. Hence, there is really a need to create a mechanism through which people can participate in the trade policy process and not leave this entirely on the temperament or inclination of the lead negotiator. The third point refers to the relation of agriculture to industry and services. The paper points out that the agriculture negotiations is relatively isolated from the other aspects of the trade talks, namely services and NAMA or the non-agri market access or industry. The fishery sector is under NAMA, so isa yan sa mga curious about the negotiation. It's agriculture, but it's under non-agri market access. No? But so definitely, the strategies of the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, the WTO negotiations, will impact on subsectors that are very important to agriculture. But beyond this, the paper rightly points out that there is a need to come up with a comprehensive negotiating mandate that understands the interrelatedness between the three sectors, especially in the negotiations. As you probably all know, the WTO is negotiated on a single undertaking basis. So when you sign one agreement, you have to sign all the other agreements. This means that there has to be a degree of strategizing among the three sectors. To be blunt about it, at the negotiation level, you need to have a clear sense of where your priorities lie. What are the things, or this can refer to policies or even subsectors that you want to safeguard, and what are the ones that you can afford to trade off. No? The Philippines have to learn to strategize how to use the principle of single undertaking so that it suits the country's negotiating objective. And the government can only do this if the three agencies leading the negotiations are all on the same page. The fourth point is mainly just a reaction to one of the statements in the paper. I think TFOR is not the result of the absence of expertise in the Department of Agriculture, but mostly really an attempt to draw in the perspective of private economic stakeholders in analyzing as well as responding to negotiating positions in the WTO and in formulating the country's negotiating framework as well as agenda. And the fifth and the last point is just to provide a degree of nuancing in understanding the relationship between governments such as the DA and civil society groups. Yes, a lot of private sector groups as well as CSOs or civil society organizations are involved in the process of developing positions in the WTO. But it is also important to point out that CSOs and NGOs in the Philippines are ranged in a broad spectrum. No? So hence, although there are civil society groups who are involved and supportive of the process of participating in the WTO negotiations, there are also those who are calling on government to jump the WTO. So kanina, nabanggit yung stop the new round. So you have a whole spectrum. You have NGOs that are engaging in the TFR, but you also have NGOs that are outside rally while TFR is meeting. But I must stress that these groups, in the general scheme of things, are also very useful in terms of creating an environment that cautions and warns government that all is not well, that there is a constituency that is actively watching and monitoring government when it comes to making trade commitments as well as trade-offs in multilateral trade bodies. In reality, these groups serve to strengthen and give way to the positioning of CSOs and NGOs who are inside actively engaged. In the end, I think the key to the Philippines continuing to adopt a global South perspective and contributing to progressive diplomacy lies in a clear vision and understanding of an overall trade policy framework that supports our own development objectives as a country from the South, and having the right institutions as well as mechanisms to ensure that this framework is fleshed out by our negotiators in a transparent, participative, and accountable manner as they represent the Philippines in multilateral trade arenas such as the World Trade Organization. So, thank you.
Okay, we come to the question and answer part. Any observations, queries? Wala ba? Well, if there's none, we can actually have the break, but we need to cut it short, no? Because we still have one speaker for this morning session. So please, you can get your snacks outside. I'm afraid you cannot bring them in. You know? I was thinking we can have a walking break, but we cannot. So let's just limit it to around 15 minutes. Okay? So we'll resume after that. Thanks.